Welcome to the Connected On-Demand Workplace webinar. My name is Ari Kepnes, and I'm the Director of Market Research here at Density. And I'm joined by Brian Weinrich. Do you want to say hi to everyone?
Hey, everyone.
So Brian is the head of product and one of the co-founders here at Density. We will be talking a little about who we are at Density just to set some context today. Then we will talk about the rise of connected on-demand platforms, and this includes things outside of the workplace, and then talk about how this relates to the workplace in terms of security, space, and services. We will then take your questions. So you should see at the bottom or the top of your screen a Q&A folder. And as we're going, please feel free to submit questions. And at the end, which should be about 20 minutes, we will take your questions. So thank you in advance for spending time with us today to discuss the workplace. And please note that if you meet the requirements and have registered before, we will be sending out a token of our appreciation of a $20 Amazon gift card. So thank you again for taking the time. And without further ado, I'll just get started here. We are Density. Density is an analytics platform for the connected workplace. And we collect our data using a proprietary people counting sensor platform. And that allows us to collect data on how people are using parts of a building. So every room, floor, and building we collect data on, and it allows us to realize the vision that I'm going to be talking through today. Today, when we think about consumers and when we think about some of the largest technological shifts that have happened, there's really a common thread, which is different expectations of experience. So people expect today that they can have access to things from just their mobile phone. They're really looking for this kind of premium experience without having to have the hassle of actually either, whether that's say for Uber, having to own a car. They can just access a car when they need it, or Instacart. They don't even have to go to a store. There's this whole kind of way of thinking around convenience. And that is really going into what we think of today as the mobile experience. What we think of today is a lot of the consumer-driven technologies. I can get what I want when I want it, and I usually want it now. So when we think about WeWork in this context as well, it's really this huge shift of the industry as we know it for workplace, where people are having rising expectations from experience. And it's meant that our industry, the whole world of workplace, is having to borrow more and more from the world of hospitality. And it has to be way more employee centric. And so when we talk about this employee experience, we think about all these apps that everyone are using, and they're all about more and more convenience. We see that thread coming through in terms of the employees today. So here is a framework for thinking about that way of getting to convenience and experience. So what we think of when we think of having a great experience, when you can access everything you want when you want it at the click of a button, it's really about kind of three levels when you think about this in the context of a workplace. And you can think about this as almost a hierarchy of needs, or a kind of collection of requests that employees would make in order for them to have a good experience at work. And we'll talk about how this kind of fits in to some of these shifts that are happening. So there's three levels that we're going to go in today. And the first is around security and safety. So if I go to a building and my needs aren't meant for security and safety, then it doesn't really matter if I can have lunch or even have access to a bathroom. If I'm totally scared for my security and safety, I need to first have that. In the same way, when we think about Uber, no one was using it until they felt secure and safe. And that's always kind of the first level. And then the next step here is around space utilization and having spaces that I can actually access that fit my needs. So the whole kind of history of workplace strategy has always been about, can we have access to the types of spaces that we need as we're doing different types of work? And this has evolved, obviously, because we don't really need large machines to do our work. We can do it from anywhere, but there's still space requirements we'll talk about. And then this whole trend around services and amenities, that's what I was saying about the hospitality trend. So you need to have the food, you need to have well-stocked bathrooms, and you need to have access to kind of all these amenities, whether it be a gym. There's really, that's the final tier of kind of the occupant experience today. So we're going to break it down into those three layers, and that's going to be our framework today for thinking through this connected workplace. And I'll start here with security. So when we think about security, as I mentioned before, it's something that is something that we don't usually think about as an occupant and employee until there's really an emergency or something like that. But what we've been hearing, I'm going to just select a few kind of use cases for each of these things to help kind of train us to think through each of these needs. But there's a huge problem today that even in the world of smart buildings, we can't even control who enters and exits a building in most buildings. And it's because of this problem of tailgating, where people will open the door for someone else, and then that person does not badge in, right? You badge in and then you hold the door. And so at a base level, we're seeing that this is a huge use case that first needs to happen in order for any of the occupant experience kind of optimizations to take place. And so we need to eliminate tailgating without adding friction. And Brian, why don't you just share with us kind of how we think through that and how we do that here at Density?
Sure. Yeah. So what we're looking at here is the density dashboard tailgating view. And we will offer two different types of things. One, we offer the live data so that you can see tailgating incidents happen in real time. And then we also offer historical data so that you know over time, how is the tailgating trends happening at a certain doorway or a certain space. And what's really nice is that you can create an alert for a tailgating incident in real time. So if you're a security team member and you want to know that a certain doorway there was a tailgating incident, you'd create your alert, and you'd get an email, a push notification, a text message, whatever you want, and then you can pull up the cameras, check to see what happened, and know that someone who came in was supposed to be there or not supposed to be there. So again, there's this confluence of live data and historical data all in one easy to use dashboard.
Right. So the reason why we start with this is, for example, we're working with Dropbox, and they're a company that really does care about the occupant experience. And they care about having all the amenities, and they care about having the right types of spaces. But they start with just a fundamental understanding of, is my building secure? And as we're thinking about creating this great workplace experience, that's usually the place to start. And so we've seen a lot of interest, and we've had a lot of conversations about solving this specific problem, because it's something that still is a big problem for people today. And so the way that we solve that is we have these solution of systems that can be integrated into access control systems. So you can actually detect in real time how many people are coming in and if there's an access control violation. So that's the first part here around safety and security. Now we're going to move up the ladder into having effective space utilization. And the problem is today that we've heard from a number of people is that it's hard to actually allocate space. Well, it's because people, they may work from home, they work in different ways, different teams work differently. Some people now, most people, in fact, do not have any private offices. So they're using space in different ways to meet. And so the need is to support employee space needs while reducing waste. And so this is a balancing act, the second tier that we've seen a lot in terms of the occupant needs. And so, Brian, why don't you just show us kind of how we think through this at Density, and then I'll frame this in terms of what we're seeing across all of our clients.
Yeah, so the screen that you're looking at here is an integration screen with one of our third-party calendar booking software. So this might be integration with Robin, Google Calendar, Team, Outlook, what have you. And essentially what we're doing is we're comparing foot traffic data, the ground truth foot traffic data that Density provides against actual calendar booking data. So you can get some really, really interesting insight here as to the number of meetings that are attended and not attended. What's the average meeting size? Maybe you're trying to right size a given room, and this will really give you insight into how that room is used by how many people. And then booking behavior. Who books the room the most? Who books the room the most and no one actually shows up to their meetings? So again, comparing foot traffic data with calendar data really gives you a nice picture of what's going on in your spaces.
Great. So if we want to zoom out a bit and just think about this in the context of our whole industry, one of the things that we do at Density, because we're installed with a lot of different customers, is we looked at a subset of 60 conference rooms or meeting rooms. And we looked at 10,000 hours of data. And these are the types of questions that you can start to answer when you're actually collecting data and when you're actually trying to have an effective space utilization. Well, one thing that we saw here was that for the 10,000 hours that we looked at, 36% of the time it was being occupied just by one person, meaning one person was using a meeting room that was intended for way more than one person. And these are the types of findings that if you're going to have effective space utilization, it's not about just having tons of space. It's having the right types of space that are both going to meet those employee needs, but also not be totally wasteful, which is what happens when you have just one person. And so that's why we're seeing this trend today of phone booths. We're seeing the trend today of trying to get people to have some of these private areas. And this is some of the conversation that we're having today. And our best clients are ones that are thinking in this mindset of how do I collect data to have effective workplaces, effective space use. And then the final kind of tier here that we're going to go through is this idea for need for services and amenities. And what we're seeing today, in the same way that you're supposed to balance both this idea of waste, but also experience, we're seeing that happen in the services and amenities, right? You may have all seen those articles that make fun of our city here of Silicon Valley and San Francisco for having free lunch or having bean bags, or having too many services and amenities. Well, the problem is that in order to do this right, you have to actually know, what your employees need. And so one of the problems that we're hearing a lot is that employees aren't coming to work every day or using every amenity. So it's a bad investment. It's not adding to the experience. And so what we're seeing here is the need for amenities and services that actually adjust to foot traffic, that are actually allowing people to have an occupant experience that's built around them. So can you talk a little bit about this, Brian, in terms of what we've done with one of the largest Fortune 500 companies that is kind of in a technology space here in the Bay Area?
Yeah, sure. So this is again back to our dashboard. And what we're looking at here is both historical data and predictive data. So each week, this team at a specific cafeteria meets and they look at the past week and they look at breakfast, lunch, dinner, the different times, what was successful, what was not, what were the trends. And then for next week, we have predictive data. So we show them, here's how many people you can expect, Sunday through next Saturday next week. And this helps with staffing, which days are going to be busiest. This helps with budgeting, how much money should you allocate to different food and all other sorts of questions you might have. So by having a look into next week, you really get you have a lot of good data points into how you can forecast budgeting.
Yeah, so I think one example of this, I actually came back from Maryland. From Maryland, I was meeting with Marriott, and they're a hospitality client, obviously. So why is that interesting to a workplace? Well, I was also at Google the week before, and they said, I really want to know what hospitality is doing, because they're businesses that are run on having great services and amenities, especially in the world of today with Airbnb. There's so much more pressure on hotel chains to have this type of data to actually respond in real time. So what we were doing with them was we were actually triggering alerts for when there's certain lounges and their gyms and their cafeterias at a certain threshold. They knew to have the staff go there, check on it, refill the food, clean it. And that's really where the future is headed when we think about this occupant experience. It's that simple. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a vision here. And Brian, if you could just talk through what we're looking at about how this relates to the space.
Yeah, so this is the Density mobile app, and it's mainly geared towards employees. It gives them real-time count of all the spaces that they might care about. So for example, if it's lunchtime and they want to go grab lunch, they can click on the cafeteria and they can see the current count. So right now there's 121 people in there. They know that it's getting a little bit quieter, and they can even use our predictive data to see what the busyness will be over the next few hours. Instead of having to check the app every few minutes to see how busy it is, we can actually just send them a push notification. Notify me when it's quiet, and boom, you get a push notification on your phone to go to the lunch, to go grab lunch at the cafeteria.
Great, thanks. So when we zoom out again, we've given you a lot of different ideas, and we want to just start with kind of this framework of thinking about these three things, which is whether you're in IT or your facilities, your workplace experience, your heads of real estate. There's really three elements that go into creating a great occupant experience today. And it's not as simple as just having another app. It's as simple as knowing if you have, from an occupant experience, security, so safety that I don't even have to think about. I can just go into the building and feel safe. Space optimization, spaces that suit my needs as an employee, and services, which are amenities and services that I want when I want them. And that framework of thinking through, when you think about your own businesses, is my space secure? Well, is it optimized for space needs? And are my services also kind of fitting into what people need? And the way that we do that is really thinking about this feedback loop between the building and the people in it, which we'll talk about in just one moment. But I think just to clarify everything, when we think about our own businesses, if we want to provide this occupant experience today, we do need to think about those three elements of the occupant and how we can serve them. So why are we at Density kind of thinking through this problem, and where do we play? We'll just talk about this for some context so that we don't have too many questions about that. So the way that Density works is that we are collecting data that serve each of those use cases, whether it's security or space services, and we're always collecting data on how these spaces are used, and then we can integrate, as Brian mentioned, into all of the systems that go into that. So if you're more IT centric or you're more facility centric, you may have different platforms that you use, or you may just use this, the dashboard and the mobile that we showed you today. But our goal is that we want to be kind of this feedback loop between the buildings and the people in it. And to do that, we do need to integrate. And just to give you some context, I've been using this word of people count, and I've been saying, how are people using space? Well, the real challenge here is that you have to measure how many people are entering and exiting a space to actually have that feedback loop that I mentioned. So people do weird things. They hide behind hinges, they walk in different directions, and they carry carts. And so what we've had to do is really develop a way to be able to account for people in their built environment. And so we use depth data, which is almost like a topographical or like a 3D scan of a space, specifically within a doorway. And as people enter and exit that door, we can count people for the whole space that they've defined. And I think what's also interesting about this personally that I didn't know a lot when I joined Density was this: everyone's talking about AI and computer vision and all these different kind of new buzzwords, but at its core, we've taught a computer to actually be able to detect a human and a human entering and exit without violating their privacy, which is a very core part of who we are here. We don't want to know who you are because that raises tons of privacy challenges. And the established technology today is really focused on, unfortunately, a lot of these camera-based technologies. So we've had to kind of build this from the bottom up. And just a quick note about how we do that: we have these devices that can be plugged in and then go through Wi-Fi or PoE, and then they're constantly put above a doorway, and they are ongoing measurement tools for how people are entering and exiting the space, and then they support all of the different use cases that we mentioned. So if you want to get started, you can reach out to us at some of our emails that we have here, and we are now right at 20 minutes past the hour, so we're going to take some of your questions. And I would love to, hear from you guys if you want to, either or now at the bottom or the top of your screen, to submit any questions that you can, and I will read through them and answer them. Okay, so the first question here is, so what is your people counter? How does it work? Okay, so I'm just going to review that part just a moment here, which is that we have these devices that marry both the hardware and the software, which means we are able to put them above a doorway. Let's say you have a conference room, you'd put them in the door to the conference room, or a cafeteria, maybe you'd put them from the elevators into the whole floor or building on those entrances. And so they're constantly measuring how many people are in the space, and they're able to kind of talk to one another to correlate for how many people are in your building. And that allows for all of the different use cases. Do you provide installation? Is that something that you need to handle? It really depends on the client. Our goal here is to get you up and running as fast and as easy as possible. So we do have some partners that we use in order to install, or we kind of can go through your own workplace if that's the way to go that way. But our goal, again, is just to get you to be collecting that data to solve these use cases that we can. the scalability on the background, can it handle a customer that has 400 meeting rooms? Brian, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So from a technical standpoint, we are totally capable of expanding to thousands and thousands of meeting rooms. And one thing we take pride in is being able to grow with you, the customer. So whether it's 0 to 10 rooms, 10 to 100 rooms, or 100 to 1,000, the design of our applications conform to the number of rooms so that it's easiest for you to navigate and understand your spaces.
Cool. This seems like a lot and it's very exciting. Where do you recommend people get started so that they're not overwhelmed? That's a great question. So, we have talked through this kind of like panacea of occupant experience, everything from space and services, and we realized that first of all, those are a lot of different types of the organization. So to do all of that at once does require a lot of buy-in. So the two questions I would ask is, in your own job, what are the kind of problems that you are having as they relate to either space needs or services or security? And can they be solved in an easier way using data? And so that's the place to start. What we've typically seen is that, with just a few devices on a perimeter of a building, you can get accurate count of the whole building of how many people came in to eat to work that day, or how many people are required to then decipher with access control integrations. So, if you want to just get started, I would just recommend, think about your own job and then also think about the building itself. And the perimeters tend to be the easiest way to get started. Okay, last question. I like the meeting room slide with all of the with charts for the whole industry. Is this something that you can share? Okay, yeah. So we're going to be sending around a recording of this webinar, and so we will be able to share that. We also have a report that is being published across all of those insights that I shared with meeting rooms specifically. And so if you're interested in that, we will also be sharing that as well on our blog, as well as in some industry publications coming up and doing a webinar specifically on that. All right. So I think we are just here wrapping up. But if you have any other questions or you just want to have a conversations, this is stuff that both Brian and I obviously live and breathe, and we love this stuff. So is there anything that we can do to help, or if you're feeling overwhelmed by all this IoT craze, anything that you need, really please feel free to reach out. And again, thank you for your time. And our emails are right here. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thanks so much for taking the time to join us.